The first episode of Doctor Who Season 1 has finally aired, but was it any good? Okay, so I've already done my first impressions of this episode and The Devil's Cord. If you want to watch that video, I'll make sure to have it linked in the corner. But this video is going to be a much more in-depth review of the Season 1 opener, Space Babies. This episode sees Ruby learning the Doctor's amazing secrets as he takes her to a baby farm run by babies in the far future, with the terrifying Bogeyman lurking below decks. But was it any good? Okay, so this episode opens immediately after the Church on Ruby Road, with some of the same shots and some new refilmed moments of what we'd already seen at the very end of that episode, kicking off right where we left off with Ruby's first adventure, which the Doctor sets to a random landing, taking them to the dinosaurs, where we get a fun butterfly effect moment which we basically saw in the trailers. Now this is a pretty fun scene overall, but it doesn't add too much to the episode, and it does feel a little bit disconnected, but I do think this is possibly a Disney edition, and it's not really a bad scene. It is kind of useful to kind of show the time traveling capabilities of the TARDIS and introduce it to new audiences on Disney Plus and any other new audiences that are watching. So like I said, this isn't like a bad scene or anything. It's a fairly fun scene, but for me personally, it doesn't add too much to the episode, and I do feel like it could have been a Disney Plus edition. And I think Ruby and the Doctor's chemistry in this episode is absolutely amazing, as can be said for the next episode as well. One of the standout moments of this in this episode is the Doctor's reaction to Ruby giving the 5 digits for the year when he's probably expecting just a 4-digit year. Now there's also a lot of exposition in this episode, which is expected. This is the start of a new era and it's introducing the show to a new audience, particularly those on Disney Plus. So I get why it's in here, but there is quite a lot of it in this episode. Now it does mostly feel natural. A lot of it is motivated by Ruby asking the Doctor questions. However, some of the exposition in this episode that the Doctor gives does sometimes feel a little bit unmotivated and unprompted, with the Doctor just randomly telling Ruby things that she hasn't asked about. But like I said, it does kind of make sense because they need to introduce these things to a new audience, but some of it could have been done a little bit more naturally, and some of it was. We also get a hint at Ruby's story arc in this episode, with a chilling scene of the Doctor and Ruby's memory of the Church on Ruby Road bleeding through into reality, with the snow coming through into the spaceship, which like I said was just a really chilling scene and a really good way at hinting at the story arc that we're going to get in the future. But I'll talk more about Ruby's story arc in my review for The Devil's Cord. So obviously in this episode we have the titular Space Babies, which is a very silly concept but quite a fun idea. It's definitely an odd choice for the opening episode of the season, unless you count the Church on Ruby Road as the opening episode. But then again, we did have Partners in Crime, which had Living Fat in that episode, so it's not too far off a standard RTD opener. This also allows for us to finally get a Doctor moment for Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor, where he's talking to Captain Poppy, explaining to them that they haven't grown up wrong and that nobody grows up wrong, which I think is a really nice message for this episode, and like I said, a very Doctor-y moment, which I'm glad we finally got to see from the 15th Doctor, and it obviously sets up the ending of this episode quite nicely. I've seen a lot of people complaining about the CGI of the talking babies, which, while it doesn't look the best, such as the reactions on their faces not suiting the dialogue, I think the effect is done as well as it could have been. So I don't really know what people would have wanted besides them maybe talking telepathically or something along those lines, but for me personally, I don't think it looks too bad for as well as it could have been done, basically. For me personally, it wasn't too distracting, but it definitely helps that the babies take a bit of a backseat after we're introduced to Jocelyn. And talking about the Space Babies, the Doctor does say Space Babies maybe one too many times, and it did start to get a little bit annoying. We're also introduced to the character of Jocelyn, or Nan-E, who was a very fun character. I really liked the introduction of this character, at first thinking that she was just an AI, for her then to get annoyed at the Doctor and break character, telling him to hurry up. And on those same lines, the Nan-E filter allows for a lot of fun comedic moments with censoring of expletives throughout this episode as a kind of running joke. The character of Jocelyn also allows for a really nice emotional moment in this episode, where she explains why she's been hiding away from the babies, as she doesn't want to see them die or for them to see her die as well. There's also some really good political commentary in this episode, with a focus on reproductive rights, with the babies being forced to be born but there being no obligation or assistance to look after them, with Ruby making a comment that it's not unlike our world, which definitely feels like a bit of a jab at the US right now. As well as this, there's also the political commentary on refugees, with the planet that accepts refugees not coming to collect them, as you physically have to show up there. However, although I do think this political commentary is good, that is basically the extent of the political commentary in this episode. It's just a couple of lines that aren't really elaborated on throughout the rest of the episode, so they maybe could have gone a little bit further there, but I do think it was still done really well and was definitely some good moments for this episode. We obviously also have the Bogeyman in this episode, which I think was a very fun, fairly standard Doctor Who monster that works really well for an opening episode. I think the hints at where it came from are very clever in this episode, not giving it away too quickly, although I had seen people speculating that the monster would have been made out of bogies before the episode had aired, so I kind of figured it out a little bit early on. But I particularly like the Doctor being confused as to why he ran away, for it to be revealed that it's because it was created with the intention of it being scary for the babies. I really liked the comedy in the reveal of the Bogeyman being made out of bogies. Once again, the Doctor and Ruby's chemistry is just great in this episode, and that's a great showcase of that. And obviously this episode ends with the Doctor saving the Bogeyman, which is very characteristic of the Doctor, and it does make sense with it being the only one of its kind as set up earlier on in the episode. However, it does still feel a bit weird as it's made to be the antagonist of the episode. Obviously it's technically fine, as I assume the Bogeyman was never actually going to kill the babies, as it was only designed to scare them, not kill them. But I do feel like there could have been more of an attempt to get the audience to empathise with it after the reveal, as it still feels a bit weird that the Doctor wants to save it, even if it does make sense character-wise. Maybe there could have been a line hinting at the fact that it was weird that the Bogeyman didn't kill Eric when it easily could have done, or something along those lines, just to prove that it was only designed to scare them and not kill them. Because I can imagine a lot of the audience were left thinking that now they've left the Bogeyman alive, it's just going to kill the babies, which I'm pretty sure isn't the intention. Overall, I think this was a perfectly fine opening episode, if not a bit sillier than usual. It establishes the Doctor and Ruby's relationship and dynamic really well, and it also establishes the concepts of the show to new viewers in a pretty natural and organic way for the most part. Although, like I said, there are some unmotivated moments of exposition in this episode. And there's also some nice hints at the further story arcs of the season in there as well. Compared to previous RTD openers, I think it's actually very similar. In my opinion, his opening episodes usually aren't the best in terms of their plot, and this episode is exactly the same. His opening episodes are usually more about the characters and introducing the audience than they are about the actual plot of the episode, so I think this one is fairly standard in terms of RTD openers, if not a bit sillier than some of his previous ones. When it comes to opening episodes in Doctor Who, I think the Moffat era did a much better job at openers, so like I said, in my opinion, Space Babies is actually a fairly standard RTD opener. Like I said, I liked this episode for the most part, but overall it was just okay. It's definitely the weaker out of the two first episodes of this season, which obviously I'll get into more next week when I review The Devil's Cord. I think if I was to put this episode on a tier list, I'd probably rank it at C, maybe B tier at a push, but for now I think I'm going to leave it at C, and maybe I'll change it up later on when we get to see the rest of the episodes. Obviously we got episode 2, The Devil's Cord, on the exact same day as this episode. My original plan was to put the review for that episode out on Sunday, but I'm going to be quite busy when it comes to doing the review for Boom, so I've decided I'm actually going to push the review for The Devil's Cord back a little bit so I can stagger those reviews out a little bit more until then. So my review for The Devil's Cord should be coming out in exactly a week's time, but if I manage to plan these out properly enough, my review for The Devil's Cord should be ready right now on my Patreon, or if you become a member. So if I do have that video ready, I'll have that on screen now, or you can go to the description and join the Patreon to see that video early. And obviously if you want to see any of my future reviews for the rest of this season, make sure you subscribe to the channel.